There's a strange feeling that follows a lot of people home at night now. Not sadness exactly. Not even stress. Something quieter than that. A kind of emotional numbness. The food arrives faster than ever. Entertainment never ends. Everything is one click away, and yet people feel strangely empty inside. Modern life was supposed to feel better than this. For decades, technology promised convenience. Economists promised abundance. Companies promised happiness. And technically, they delivered. Most people today live with luxuries that would have looked absurd 50 years ago. Unlimited music. Instant communication. Cheap dopamine on demand. Food from anywhere. Movies anytime. Entire identities built from screens small enough to fit in a pocket. And still anxiety keeps rising, loneliness keeps rising, depression keeps rising, and burnout became normal. Somehow, the richest consumer society in history produced millions of emotionally exhausted people scrolling through happiness instead of feeling it, which raises an uncomfortable possibility. What if modern economies are no longer designed to make people happy? What if they're designed to keep people chasing happiness forever? Because those are two very different things. And the difference between them may explain almost everything about modern life. Including why people buy things they don't need. Work jobs they secretly hate and spend entire years waiting for a future that never quite arrives. The strange part is, this system actually works incredibly well. Just not in the way most people think. Because modern economies discovered something extremely profitable. A satisfied person buys less, but an emotionally restless person, that person can power entire industries. And once you see it, you start noticing it everywhere. The average person now sees thousands of advertisements every single day. Not just traditional ads. Everything became advertising. Social media. Influencers. Lifestyle content. Even self-improvement. Especially self-improvement. Because modern marketing stopped selling products a long time ago. Now it sells emotional transformation. A watch is no longer a watch. Its status. A car is no longer transportation. It's identity. A skincare routine becomes self-worth. A vacation becomes proof that life is meaningful. A coffee order becomes personality branding. The economy quietly shifted from selling usefulness to selling emotional symbolism, and this happened for a reason. By the mid-20th century, basic consumer needs in wealthy countries were already being met at massive scale. People already had refrigerators, cars, televisions, clothes. The problem was no longer production. The problem became consumption. How do you convince people to keep buying things they technically no longer need? That question changed modern capitalism forever. Because companies realized something important. Human desires are expandable. There is no natural limit. A person who owns one pair of shoes can be convinced they need 10. A working phone can suddenly feel outdated. A perfectly good life can start feeling inadequate after 10 minutes on Instagram. And once economies learned how to monetize insecurity, growth accelerated dramatically. The genius of the system is that it rarely forces anyone to do anything. It simply shapes emotional environments. Quietly, constantly, you open your phone in the morning and immediately see people richer than you. More attractive than you. More productive than you. More successful than you. Even if those images are curated, even if they're fake, emotionally, your brain still reacts as if the comparison is real, and comparison is one of the most powerful economic engines ever created, because people don't only buy things for pleasure. They buy things to close emotional gaps. To feel respected. Accepted. Admired. Safe, relevant. That's why luxury industries exploded during periods of rising inequality. Ironically, the more financially insecure people become, the more valuable status symbols often become. Because symbols help people temporarily escape emotional reality. For a few moments, they don't feel behind anymore. And modern economies became exceptionally good at manufacturing those moments, tiny emotional highs. Delivered continuously. Fast food. Notifications. Streaming platforms. Online shopping. Dating apps. Short-form videos. The business model is almost always the same. Capture attention. Trigger emotion. Provide temporary relief. Repeat, over and over. And over time, something strange starts happening to people. Pleasure becomes less satisfying. Not because life got worse, but because stimulation became constant. Human psychology was never built for permanent dopamine access. For most of history, pleasure was occasional. Now it's industrialized. The average person can experience more stimulation before breakfast than someone centuries ago experienced in a month. Which sounds amazing at first, until the nervous system adapts. And that adaptation changes everything. Psychologists call this hedonic adaptation. The basic idea is simple. Humans normalize improvements very quickly. The new car becomes normal. The bigger apartment becomes normal. The higher salary becomes normal. And once something becomes normal, it stops producing the same emotional effect. So people chase the next upgrade. And the next one. And the next one. Not realizing the finish line keeps moving. Modern economies quietly depend on this psychological loop. Because endless satisfaction would actually slow consumption down. Think about how strange that is. Entire industries benefit when people remain emotionally unsettled. Social media platforms benefit from insecurity. Beauty industries benefit from self-doubt. Luxury brands benefit from status anxiety. Productivity industries benefit from feelings of inadequacy. Even outrage became profitable. Especially outrage. Because angry people engage more. Fearful people click more. Anxious people scroll longer. Attention became one of the most valuable resources on earth. And human emotion became the extraction point. The largest companies in the world are no longer simply selling products. They are competing for psychological territory inside the human mind. For your focus. Your habits. Your emotional patterns. Your identity. And they use enormous amounts of data to do it. Every pause. Every click. Every hesitation. Every late-night search. The system learns continuously. Not necessarily to help people, but to predict them, and prediction became extraordinarily profitable. If companies can predict what triggers emotion, they can influence behavior at massive scale. Not perfectly, but effectively enough. That's why modern advertising feels different now. Older ads used to interrupt entertainment. Now advertisements often are the entertainment. Influencers blur the line completely. People no longer consume lifestyles accidentally. They consume them professionally. And eventually, the performance spreads into ordinary life. People curate themselves constantly now. Vacations become content. Meals become content. Relationships become content. Fitness becomes content. Even relaxation became strangely performative. People don't just want to experience life anymore. They want visible proof that life is being experienced correctly. Which creates a very strange economy. One where appearances can become more valuable than reality itself. A person deeply in debt can still appear wealthy online. Someone emotionally exhausted can still look successful. A miserable job can still produce beautiful LinkedIn updates. And the more visual society becomes, the more rewarding appearances become. That changes financial behavior in dangerous ways, because status pressure is expensive. People stretch budgets for lifestyles they can't comfortably afford. They finance identities with debt. Buy now pay later systems normalize artificial affordability. Subscription economies quietly drain income in the background. None of this feels dramatic individually. That's the point. Modern financial pressure often arrives invisibly. $10 here. $20 there. Monthly payments everywhere. Small leaks. Until entire paychecks disappear into maintaining lifestyles that no longer even feel enjoyable. And despite all this consumption, many people still feel emotionally stuck. Which confuses them. Because the system implied something very different. It implied that more convenience would create more happiness. But convenience and happiness are not the same thing. In fact, too much convenience sometimes creates entirely new forms of emptiness. Food arrives without effort. Entertainment arrives without anticipation. Communication arrives without depth. Friction disappears. And strangely, meaning often disappears with it. Because humans historically attached emotional value to effort. To waiting. To building. To earning. To overcoming difficulty. When everything becomes immediate, experiences can start feeling weightless. Disposable. That may partially explain why modern life often feels oddly unreal. Everything moves quickly. Everything is optimized. Everything is available. Yet many people secretly feel disconnected from their own lives. Like passive observers. Consumers instead of participants. And perhaps the strangest part is that people usually blame themselves for this feeling. They assume they lack discipline. Gratitude. Motivation. Sometimes that's true. But sometimes the environment itself is designed in ways that continuously destabilize attention and emotional balance. Because stable, content people are actually difficult to monetize aggressively. A person who genuinely enjoys quiet evenings doesn't constantly seek stimulation. A person comfortable with themselves is harder to manipulate through status pressure. A person emotionally fulfilled offline becomes less dependent on digital validation. That doesn't mean some giant conspiracy exists. It's more mechanical than that. Companies simply optimize for engagement, growth, profit, retention. And over time, systems naturally evolve toward whatever captures human attention most effectively. Unfortunately, human attention is often captured most effectively through emotional discomfort. Fear, desire, comparison, uncertainty. Those emotions keep people consuming, which creates a strange contradiction at the center of modern economies. The system needs people emotionally activated, but emotionally fulfilled people often consume less impulsively. And this tension now shapes entire cultures. You can see it in work culture. People are encouraged to treat themselves because work became emotionally draining. So consumption becomes compensation. A difficult week justifies spending. Stress justifies convenience. Exhaustion justifies escape. And businesses profit from both sides of the problem. They profit from the stress and from the coping mechanisms sold afterward. The economy creates fatigue, then monetizes relief from fatigue. That cycle can continue for years without people fully noticing it. Until eventually, something feels off. A person wakes up one day and realizes they've spent years optimizing life, without actually feeling alive inside it. And that realization is becoming more common, especially among younger generations. Because younger people grew up fully inside the attention economy. For them, comparison never turns off. There is no psychological distance anymore. At any moment, someone richer, more attractive, more successful, is visible instantly. Human brains were never designed for global-scale social comparison 24 hours a day. And yet millions experience exactly that, every single morning. Which helps explain why even financially stable people increasingly report feeling behind. Because modern status systems have no ceiling anymore. There is always someone displaying more. More luxury. More beauty. More productivity. More success. And algorithms continuously push those extremes to the top because extremes attract attention. Normality rarely goes viral. This distorts perception in subtle but powerful ways. People begin comparing ordinary lives against highly optimized highlight reels. And slowly, reality itself starts feeling insufficient. Not because life objectively worsened, but because expectations became psychologically inflated. Which may be one of the defining economic problems of modern society. Not absolute poverty alone, but manufactured dissatisfaction. An economy where emotional stability becomes difficult to maintain because instability itself is profitable. And if that sounds dramatic, look at the numbers. Rates of anxiety and depression have risen sharply in many developed countries over the last 2 decades. Social isolation increased. Attention spans fragmented. Consumer debt expanded massively. Screen time exploded. At the exact same time the world became more technologically convenient. That contradiction matters. Because it suggests abundance alone may not solve human dissatisfaction. In some cases, it may intensify it. Especially when abundance is mixed with endless comparison and constant stimulation. Which raises a deeper question. If modern economies are extremely efficient at producing comfort, why do so many people still feel emotionally restless? Maybe because comfort and meaning are not interchangeable. Maybe convenience removed certain struggles, while also removing certain forms of fulfillment tied to effort, patience, and community. Or maybe the problem runs even deeper than that. Maybe economies built around endless consumption eventually require endless emotional dissatisfaction to sustain themselves. Because if everyone suddenly felt deeply content with what they already had, what would happen to growth? What would happen to advertising? Luxury industries? Attention platforms? Consumer culture itself? That's the uncomfortable possibility underneath all of this. Not that happiness disappeared, but that modern systems may function more effectively when happiness remains permanently incomplete. Close enough to chase, never close enough to fully catch. And maybe that's why so many people today feel trapped in a strange emotional loop. Always improving, always optimizing, always consuming, yet somehow, never arriving. Because the economy of fake happiness doesn't fail by accident. It succeeds precisely by keeping people searching for something just beyond reach, and the unsettling question is, if an entire system quietly depends on emotional dissatisfaction, what happens when millions of people finally realize it?